Hey guys, welcome back to Larry TCG. In today's video, we're going to be doing a little bit of a reflection on the OP12 format, including PRB. We've just hit OP13 now, and I went to my locals actually very recently, and the whole room was full of people playing Zoro, Emu, Ace, Roger. It was very surprising actually because, having played OP12 format and seeing the variety of decks, it was a bit of a shock to kind of see it sort of narrow as quickly as it did. But look, we've known about OP13 for a little while now. We've known what the best decks have been, and it's going to be interesting to see how the TCG navigates it. But I guess the purpose of this video is to just kind of go through OP12 format and just have a discussion about it and see how it went, where we landed, what we think OP13 is going to look like over in the West, and just have a bit of a chat. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate it if you do. If you like the video, please leave a like and a comment. If you've got any questions, feel free to pop them down into the comment section. But let's crack on. So OP12 for me personally was one of my most explored formats since I started playing the game. It was very, very diverse, as we'll go into in a moment. And I started playing competitively again after taking a bit of a break since the start of the year. So I kind of had a bit more of a keener eye on what was going on around me, on tournament results, on what decks were topping and stuff like that. So I'll be breaking my thoughts down into 3 separate sections in the video. First one will be the lead up to the release of OP12, what we sort of saw before that and kind of provides the context for OP12, the initial player response and engagement as well in that section. Second section will be around format, solidification, and the adaptation process. So as we know, as we kind of move into a new format, people kind of play, decks that they enjoy still, or, playing those new meta decks and just testing the waters a bit. But as time goes on, we sort of see the lists and we see more adaptation as the format progresses, as people change their decks to, have a bit of an edge against each other. And the third section is just the end of the format thoughts and just, I guess, what we kind of are thinking about moving into OP13 and what we can expect for the future. So as we know, across 2024, there was a really big, I guess, uptick in black decks and the power level of black decks at the time. So we had Sakazuki come out in OP05, and then in OP06 we had Gecko Moria come out, and then OP7 we saw Lucci. So black decks kind of took the spotlight in 2024 with a lot of really, really strong cards in the deck. Being able to remove your opponent's board, creating these really strong board states, and being able to control your opponent's resources was really, really strong at that time, obviously. So the ban list saw a number of key pieces being removed for these decks. So it allowed a lot of the other decks that were really vulnerable to those removal to be viable again. So historically, colors like green and blue have had a really tough time into black, and you couldn't really go into an event and think that you wouldn't verse black decks. It would be really tough. Like, say if you came in with a Boa Hancock deck or a Green Bonnie deck, you were probably going to be versing a black deck at some point in your tournament run. It was a very, very tough time for those decks. They had their own strengths, but at the time, anti-removal was pretty low in terms of protection that we see now, such as, Tashigi and a bunch of other cards that have inbuilt protection. So those decks really, really struggled. After that ban list in March was announced, we saw the Gecko Moria banned, we saw Ice Age banned, and it was a really, really good opportunity to see some of these decks come back. So in OP10, the TCG, it was kind of a bit of a period of discovery for the meta. A lot of people were unsure if black decks were going to be viable still because they saw the bans for Ice Age and Gecko. A lot of decks that were previously overwhelmed by the presence of Gecko Moria and these really strong black decks were kind of creeping back in, but people were unsure if they could actually make them viable again moving forward. OP10 bought a couple of interesting leaders such as Green Yellow Law and Smoker, but I think people were still a bit on the fence about what they wanted to play. It was a kind of a weird format for sure. Later in the year, we saw OP13 release, and as we know, the dominance of Blue Purple Luffy started from that point. Later on in the format, another unique banlist decision was made to curb the power of Blue Purple Luffy, as it had stellar results over in the OCG, and the TCG was starting to mirror a lot of those results in the West. We also saw Bandai address the future threat of the alt-wing con deck Nami. So pair bans for the Blue-Purple Luffy leader meant that their longevity and the defense of the deck was significantly reduced. Couldn't use the Lin or the Katakuri 8 costs anymore. And yeah, the Blue Nami leader ended up getting banned, with an errata for East Blue only in the deck being announced. So that came into effect at the end of OP11, start of OP12 for us. With the spirits of Ghosts Past in the taillights, OP12 saw a fresh change to the format. New decks such as Zoro, Kuzan, Rayleigh, and even Koala added a breath of fresh air and modern power to the format. I know personally I was very excited when Koala came out, and when she was announced, of course, frame 1 I ended up buying the Koala leader and a bunch of alts, so it was really cool. All of these decks that I mentioned have very unique game plans too, so it was kind of, you could pick what you wanted and how you like to play, and pick up the cards there. And these decks that I mentioned here, a lot of the cards for their respective decks were actually in OP12, meaning that you didn't have to have all of these cards prior coming into OP12. You could just pick up a lot of the cards from OP12 base set itself, and then just add a couple of extra things into the deck from other sets. So it made it a lot more accessible overall. From a player perspective, the general feedback and engagement seemed to increase significantly around this time. The format had leveled out to a point where new players could actually come into the game and not feel oppressed by these really strong black decks, or having to verse Blue Purple Luffy every single round, and you know how that goes. So it was a pretty good time for people to come into it. The inclusion of specifically the Zoro leader, in conjunction with the earlier release of the 4 Empress structure decks, plus the Bonnie and the Yamato deck, meant that competitively viable decks were now a lot more readily available at LGSs, which is obviously a very good thing for people coming into the game and for people that want to continue playing the game. The Zoro leader being a top tier threat straight out of the box, with a comparatively lower learning curve, really cool artworks, really nice card inclusions, and just being a really recognizable character from the anime and the manga, meant that a lot of people were actually really drawn to the game at this time, because, you know, Zoro's really cool. He was on the cover of the box, he had Mihawk, and, you know, it was one of the best decks at the time, so it's kind of a perfect storm for newer players and for existing players who have come into the game maybe even a couple of formats ago and looking to continue playing. So it was really positive. So product as a whole seemed to be more readily available as well, meaning that there wasn't going to be those really frustrating situations where product was limited to only a couple of packs per person or completely sold out. You're needing cards from this new set to play your new deck, and they're either unavailable or being scalped online for crazy prices. So that in itself is a really good thing. I know Bandai and One Piece has suffered from that in the past, so it's really good that it's been addressed for Bandai here. From pre-release onwards, at least from my perspective in Australia, a lot more people were joining the game and competing at locals and events. People that I've never seen before were coming through to locals, people were buying cards, people were getting into the game. It was a really good time. I think this influx of players kind of mirrored the OP5 and OP9 time, where we had, you know, a lot of people coming through. The OP5 format specifically, it was the Gear 5 set, white box with Gear 5 Luffy on the front, very memorable, and it you know, increased the power level of the game considerably when a couple of those leaders were announced. Had a lot of really nice collectible items in there. It had 3 mangas in it. It had a bunch of really nice SPs. And we saw this in OP9 as well. The set introduced 4 different mangas because of the 4 Emperors, some beautiful SPs, some really competitively viable cards, really nice alt arts, etc. So OP5 and OP9 were really important sets for the game. But OP12, I feel like, even though it didn't have 3 mangas or all of the bells and whistles, it allowed people an entry point into the game, or to continue playing the game at a competitive level without feeling stifled by previous pricing or by decks in the format. So I think it was a really good call for Bandai there. So with OP12 out and all of the new people getting their decks, it became very apparent very quickly that this format was going to be extremely diverse. Initial discussion and dialogue from content creators, players, and early results from events attempted to predict what the meta offerings would initially be. Whilst Bandai announced simultaneous release for early 2026, the TCG was still presently behind the OCG with set release. So naturally, players knew decks like Zoro, Green Purple Luffy, Rayleigh, Bonnie, etc. would still be really key threats in the format. Whilst the OCG results can show meta trends, it belies the creative elements that TCG players are known for. TCG players overall are pretty creative. They love taking their pet decks to formats, they love building a deck, using new supports to enhance their already existing game plans. It's pretty cool. Like, you'll see results, you'll see events, and you'll see this one or two random decks that you would never expect to top. And it kind of inspires more people to play their fun decks as well, because, if they can do it, so can I, sort of thing. Players are definitely more motivated to master their favorite leaders and incorporate that new support in order to adapt to the format. So in every meta, there's obviously going to be top decks and there's going to be new problems to have to solve. I think people really enjoy the challenge of using these new support cards and being able to create their favorite decks and counter the meta decks as well. So it's pretty cool. I know I really enjoy that kind of aspect of One Piece. On the channel, I obviously make a lot of different videos for a lot of different leaders. So I really enjoy the creative aspect of the game. At home, I have a million decks as well, and I've got bulk and cards from so many different sets. So, if I decide that I want to make a change to a deck, I don't have to scurry and run around for cards. I just keep them all on hand, and if I decide I want to play a different deck every event, then yeah, I definitely can. But the sim is obviously really good for deck creation too. You don't necessarily need to own every card or have all of the commons and stuff in boxes like I do. You can build the deck on the sim and give it a go. So people are more inspired to create these rogue or fun decks initially on the sim. Give it a go, and if it does see some success, then maybe you can pick up some of the cards at locals and give it a crack. So with the innovation that naturally comes each format and the players willing to, play their rogue decks, it became more and more apparent that TCG players were very keen to innovate and bring their favorite decks to events and to, try the new support with their rogue decks. And as such, jungle format was born. Jungle format's a bit of a slang that we use to refer to a format that is very diverse. So, you don't know what you're going to find in the jungle, right? So you could rock up to locals and verse 4 different decks. Oftentimes during this format, I did. You could go to a regional and play a deck that you've never played before, which is really cool in a way. As a Yu-Gi-Oh player myself and an avid enjoyer of creating, as I said, it was pretty exciting to see people cooking and people bringing to life their creations, using the new support, giving these older decks a bit of a breath of fresh air as well. A deck, if you look at a deck initially and think, oh, it's not that good, a deck previously written off may randomly have really insane matchups into some of the meta contenders. And with a really good run and a good pilot, you could even see a top 64 or a top cut result. It's not uncommon. So it's really common to see meta decks have a really strange bad matchup with a rogue deck. Like, some decks can just be the perfect counter to that. And that's not to say that the rogue deck itself has good matchups into everything. That's obviously why it's a rogue deck. But you can definitely, with a good day, as I said, if you dodge your bad matchups and you're managing to queue into the decks that you think you're going to hit, you can definitely just win out, And we've seen this before, and we've seen this all across the format. Naturally though, it definitely wasn't just the rogue decks that were adapting. We were seeing proficiency being honed with the top meta decks as well. So focused meta players were gradually getting more reps, they were getting more experience and finding gaps in deck building. As the format solidified, even decks like UP Luffy, despite getting its paired ban from the recent ban list, were seeing a big resurgence after the deck concept was revisited and the deck builds were revised. So initially people didn't really know if the deck was going to be viable because it lost its heal card in Lin Lin and then it lost its defense. But people were able to adapt pretty quickly and it became very evident that UP Luffy was here to stay. and then it was going to be one of the best decks. Bonnie as well took a stronger grip of the format, with more and more top cut results coming through as events passed. I think Bonnie was another example of a deck that people knew would have been viable from the start, but the extent of which was not fully apparent until, you know, the format started to progress, which was really, really cool. Bonnie obviously being a green deck with a lot of different tech cards, and, you know, being able to effectively use a bunch of support cards for green meant that you're able to tech for whatever is going to be prevalent in the meta. So she had a pretty good matchup into Zoro as well, which, you know, Zoro was one of the most popular decks. So I think that appealed to a lot of people as well. As the format progressed, we saw the release of PRB02, which provided a lot of support for existing meta decks. And it also provided a helping hand for some of those tier 1.5 and 2 decks that we were discussing before. Cards such as the 3-cost Bonnie, the 4-cost blocker Lucky Roo, 6-cost Gecko, which in a way is kind of a spiritual successor to the 8-cost Gecko that got banned earlier in the year. 4-cost Kobe, the 6-cost Law, 4-cost Marco, and many more cards. All of those cards further bumped up the consistency of these decks and bolstered their existing game plans. Decks such as Red Green Smoker, Shanks, Purple Yellow Pudding, and even Gecko Moria saw a rise in popularity and settled into their niche thanks to the certain supports from EB02. So Pudding also got the 7-cost Pudding from PRB02, which really, really good card. It lets you play, lets you refill your hand and play 8-cost Katakuri from your hand. Pair bans only affected the UP Luffy leader, so you could still play the Katakuri in the Pudding deck. So and then we saw Red Green Smoker benefit from the Law being a Punk Hazard card, and then the Kobe, which is a Navy card and provides a really nice way for the deck to refill its hand, and yeah, just being able to keep up with the board presence. So Red Green Smoker was definitely eyed up to be one of the better decks after PRB, and it's certainly a lot of fun. Gecko Moria saw a few tops actually towards the end of the format, which was really, really cool. I know Gecko is one of my favorite leaders as well. I'm a big fan of the Thriller Bark archetype, it's really cool. Meta decks like Green Purple Luffy, Zoro, and Bonnie also saw some extra buffs to their decks, and that provided them with some extra gas to kind of continue topping throughout the format, which was really cool. They weren't really big changes. I know for Green Purple Luffy, they got another Nami searcher, which was kind of cool, and it really upped the consistency of that deck. And then Bonnie and Zoro really just saw, Bonnie saw the 3-cost Bonnie, which is obviously very, very impactful for that deck, but Zoro kind of just saw another 2k, which is fine, but you know, it had the stats and the attributes to be able to search, which was really nice. And you know, it was a blocker as well that couldn't be, well, it could be rested, but it couldn't be rested, you know, so really cool card. So PRB02, or I guess OP12.5 format, was really diverse, albeit really short-lived, unfortunately. It in a way kind of exemplifies the OP12 format as a whole. Seeing so many decks being viable it was a really good time to play the game, I think. Whilst it's very early days, the discourse is that the jungle format may be gone now from OP12. With previous borderline decks having a much harder time competing, it kind of feels like we're going to be moving into a more narrower format overall. As we look into OP13, and again, being able to look at OCG results and being privy to the trends from the OCG, it appears from day one that we're going to be seeing Black Emu, Red Blue Ace, and Zoro being the best decks. We can also see a bit of a power creep from OP13 as well, with the decks that I just mentioned being exceptionally powerful and kind of pushing out a lot of these other decks that previously saw some place in the format. So I'll talk a little bit about the 3 big decks at the moment. So Emu is able to load up its trash with very powerful 5 Elders card pool, and being able to get to that late game to play their boss monster, their 10-cost 5 Elders, which has an effect that lets you summon all of the five Elders from the trash, and they all have effects that are very unique and strong. So it's going to lead to some really insane advantage states. Emu also has some really strong defense with some really potent counter events, and it has inbuilt blockers in its archetype as well. So Emu is definitely going to be one of those really strong decks of the format. Ace, despite being a 3-life leader, has incredible defense built into the leader effect the 6k stat line, and the inherent nature of the Whitebeard's Pirate package, with some great additions from the Ace Newgate structure deck that was released earlier in the year, and of course PRB02 enables massive hand size and beefy board states. So Ace, very scary deck when you actually start versing it. It's very hard to make them take a damage sometimes. They're obviously 6k from the outset, and if they take a damage or you KO something with 6k power or more on their field, then they get to draw a card. So their hand size is going to be really, really big throughout the course of the game. The defense is also juxtaposed with some incredible offensive pressure as well. Some of the most imposing units in the game are played in this deck. So you've got, you know, your 10 cost Newgate from OP13, you've got 10 cost Roger, and then we've got some really strong tech options in the OP8 Newgate, or Taxbeard as they call it. And then of course the OP02 Newgate, which is the 9 cost red one. And that allows you to become an 8k base and has a really strong on attack effect as well. So these units are obviously massive, at least 10,000 power, and yeah, just really, really large presences on the field. The 10 cost Newgate from OP13 doubles as a blocker, and it gives you more card draw and allows you to be more proactively offensive as well, because it gives 2 Don to one of your characters and then 2 Don to your leader as well. So if you're able to build up your board, you play this out, often with the 8 cost I Am Whitebeard event from the Ace Newgate structure deck, lets you play that on 8 Don even, if you're on the evens curve, and yeah, lets you get these really big bodies down early. And then of course, even though it's a blocker, you can still use it as a 12k swing, because why not? So the last deck is Zorro. So whilst retaining its original swing game plan that it had in OP12, it's kind of made some adaptations to accommodate for Emu and Ace in OP13. Some stellar support released in OP13 has enabled Zorro to pivot away from its initial game plan and play a lot more of a mid-range game. The OP12 mainstay, the 8 cost Mihawk, has actually been removed in favor of a bunch of options that allow Zorro to board flood, as well as being able to offensively pressure during that mid game. And I think that's really important against Emu, who wants to get to that late game, and of course Ace too, who if they get to the late game, they'll just be playing a lot of Newgate blockers, and it's going to get really hard for you to end the game there. Zorro's mid-game options give it a lot of Don economy, being able to use the 6 cost Lore to bounce back your Searcher and then play out a Tashigi or a Cavendish. Allows you to cheat out a lot of bodies for very little cost in the deck. And then on 3 Don as well, you've also got the Mihawk from the Zorro's Sanji structure deck, which lets you cheat out a new 4 cost Zorro from OP13, which has a great effect that says if your leader is Straw Hat or Film, I believe, you can restand 2 Don on play, and then it itself restands at the end of turn. So it's just a card that lets you swing every turn and restand it, and it's very, very difficult to remove. Zorro really wants to flood the board now in the mid game and then start swinging quite wide into Emu and Ace. So that's sort of what it's going for now. And due to these adaptations, it gives Zorro a bit more of a fighting chance into the meta. Aside from the top 3 at the moment though, players have been exploring other options to counter the meta. OP13 Sabo allows for some very efficient curve plays and setup, whilst OP09 Lim is being considered for her willingness to go first in a go second meta. She's got inbuilt ramp, and she's got some potential potent tech options in 9 cost Zorro and the new OP13 Shanks top end. So Lim is an interesting pick at the moment because Emu and Ace both want to go second, and Lim doesn't mind going first. Lim prefers to go first actually, because she gets to use her leader effect on her second turn, and being able to ramp to that 9 cost Zorro can really put a lot of pressure on Emu because they can't really remove that card at all. The new OP13 Shanks provides a really strong top end, which lets you restand all your Don, and the ruling is that you can still use your leader effect with it too, so you can still play something out, and then you can allocate some Dons to your characters and, you know, get a bunch of swings in whilst also developing a 10-12 body, which is really cool. In December, the TCG will also see the new Goldie Roger 8 cost promo being released. It will serve to up the power level of the Roger leader itself, and then it'll put UP Luffy back on the map. I know that at the moment, UP Luffy is struggling a little bit into the meta, but this new Roger will boost your leader to an 8,000 power, and you're able to play it off your Sanji, of course, that you've, use your leader effect to stack onto your deck. As we move closer to simultaneous release, Bandai is announcing and revealing a lot of upcoming products. OP14 actually comes out on the 22nd of November in the OCG, and they've recently received the EBO3 set, which is the Heroine set, which we don't get until the end of February or start of February next year, which is quite a while actually. Eventually we'll be in a unique position where both the TCG and the OCG will get reveals at the same time, and deck building will be able to start in unison. So pretty unique position because, OCG gets all of these reveals. Obviously we see them in the TCG, but unfortunately we can't start crafting decks for the upcoming format because that's not our format yet. We're gonna have to wait another few months until we get the cards. So it's going to be good to see the reveals and then know that we're going to get the set at the same time, and then we can start cooking up something cool and theory crafting as well. But until then, I guess it's just business as usual. TCG will have their own take on the format, despite the OCG having a plethora of results. And then, we always will be a little bit different to what the OCG presents, just because people tend to want to play their own decks and do what they want. So it'll be really intriguing to see what adaptations and changes people make, even though we've sort of seen what the OP13 format looked like in the OCG. And I think, as it always does, we're going to see some random deck prop up that's going to have some really strange interaction in the meta, and it's going to see some tops. So thank you very much for listening to the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and a comment. Please subscribe as well, really helps me out. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.